The dumbest ways to get cancer faster. Number 1, get sunburned on purpose. The easiest place to start is something that's already sitting right outside your window, the sun. Its ultraviolet rays don't just make your skin hurt, they physically damage the DNA inside your skin cells, causing tiny mutations every time you burn. Get sunburned 5 separate times in your life, and your risk of developing skin cancer roughly doubles. So step 1 is simple. Skip the sunscreen and head outside right when the sun is directly overhead, when UV exposure peaks. If you really want to speed things up, don't stop at sea level. Every 1,000 meters you climb in elevation, UV exposure increases noticeably because there's less atmosphere above you to filter it out. So grab a backpack and head up a mountain while you're at it. Thinner air, stronger sun, faster damage. Combine sunbathing with altitude and you're stacking 2 UV multipliers at once, hitting your skin cells from every angle available. None of this feels dramatic in the moment. There's no instant symptom, no immediate warning, nothing that tells you a mutation just happened. Your skin just quietly accumulates damaged cells, one careless afternoon at a time, until eventually the accumulated mutations tip a few cells into growing out of control. Of course, 5 sunburns usually takes most people a couple of decades to rack up, so if you're in a rush, this is honestly one of the slowest options on the list. Number 2, rub citrus on your skin first. Once you've got sunburn covered, there's a way to make the damage worse without much extra effort. Grab some citrus, rub the juice on your skin, then go straight back into the sun. Lemons, limes, and other citrus fruits contain compounds called furocoumarins, and on their own, they're harmless, but the moment UV light hits them, they change completely. These compounds slide directly into your DNA and wedge themselves between the base pairs, physically welding the 2 strands together. When your skin cells try to divide normally afterward, they can't properly read or copy that section of DNA anymore, and the new cells that get produced come out abnormal. This isn't hypothetical, it has a name, phytophotodermatitis, sometimes nicknamed margarita burn, because it shows up in real people who spill citrus juice on their hands at a party and then spend the afternoon in the sun without realizing it. It usually looks like an unusually severe, oddly shaped sunburn that appears a day or 2 later, sometimes leaving discoloration that lingers for months afterward. On its own, one exposure won't give you cancer, it'll just give you a strange rash and a lot of confused questions at the pharmacy, but pair it with the sunburn habit from step 1, and you're actively helping the UV weld skin cell DNA together first, making the damage harder to repair. Repeat that pattern enough times and you're doing exactly what it takes to push ordinary sun damage into something far more serious. Number 3, raid your own kitchen. If the outdoors isn't convenient today, the next option is a lot closer than you'd think. Sitting right in your kitchen. Styrofoam containers are convenient, cheap, and everywhere, but heating food inside them is where things get interesting. Styrofoam is made from polystyrene, and when you microwave food inside it, the heat can cause tiny amounts of styrene and other chemical compounds to leach directly into whatever you're eating. Some of these compounds are classified as possible carcinogens, meaning repeated exposure over years is linked to increased cancer risk. So go ahead, microwave everything in the container it came in, extra minutes for good measure, no need to transfer it to a plate first, then when you're thirsty, skip the tap water. Grab a plastic water bottle instead, but not a fresh one. Leave it sitting in a hot car for 3 days first. Heat speeds up the breakdown of plastic, encouraging chemicals like BPA and various plasticizers to leach into the water sitting inside it, turning a simple bottle of water into something closer to a science experiment. None of this will make you sick immediately. It's a slow accumulation, meal after meal, bottle after bottle, small doses of chemical exposure that your body has to process over and over for years, until the cumulative damage adds up to something worse, which honestly is a lot of microwaved leftovers to eat for a payoff that won't show up until you're old enough to have grandkids asking why you still do that. Number 4, breathe in welding fumes. Once you've exhausted what your own kitchen has to offer, it's time to look for something a little more industrial. Find the nearest welding shop and breathe deeply. Welding produces more than just sparks and bright light. It releases a cloud of fine metal fumes, tiny airborne particles of manganese, chromium, nickel, and other metals that get vaporized by the extreme heat of the arc. Multiple studies have classified welding fume exposure as carcinogenic to humans, specifically linking it to increased rates of lung cancer among welders who work without proper ventilation or respiratory protection. These particles are small enough to travel deep into your lungs, past the point where your body's usual filtering systems can catch them. Once they're lodged there, they can trigger chronic inflammation, and inflammation sustained over long periods of time is one of the most reliable ways to encourage healthy cells to mutate and eventually turn cancerous. Professional welders are required to wear respirators and work in ventilated spaces specifically because of this well-documented risk. So obviously step 4 is to skip all of that entirely. Walk right up to someone mid-weld, lean in close, and inhale as much of that metallic haze as you comfortably can. It won't hurt immediately, and that's exactly the problem. The damage from occupational fume exposure typically takes decades to show up as diagnosed cancer, which is a strange amount of patience to ask of someone whose entire plan is get cancer as fast as possible. Number 5. Go looking for nuclear radiation. If fumes from a workshop still feel a bit too mild, the next level up involves radiation strong enough to break DNA directly, not just damage it from the outside. Ionizing radiation carries enough energy to physically snap DNA strands apart, scrambling genetic instructions in the process. So if you want a real dose, there are options. You could go for a swim in one of the lakes in the former Soviet Union that was used as a dumping site for nuclear waste, still measurably radioactive decades later. You could spend time hanging around old American facilities once used to build nuclear weapons, or you could go camping in the exclusion zone around the ruins of the Chernobyl reactor, still one of the most radioactive places on Earth. And if you're feeling especially committed, get close to something called the elephant's foot, a solid mass of melted nuclear fuel and reactor material left behind after the Chernobyl meltdown. Standing near it for just a few minutes delivers enough radiation to put you in a hospital for days afterward, assuming you survived the exposure at all. None of these locations are subtle. They're fenced off, monitored, and actively avoided by everyone who understands what radiation actually does to living tissue, which means getting close to any of them takes more effort dodging guards and radiation checkpoints than it does actually developing a tumor. Number 6. Leave the atmosphere entirely. For those still not satisfied with fenced-off radioactive sites, there's an option that skips the fence altogether, leaving the planet. Space is soaked in high-energy radiation, and one of the biggest sources is cosmic rays, high-speed particles that constantly rain down on Earth from deep space. Down here on the surface, you're shielded from most of it by the planet's atmosphere, which acts like a giant filter, absorbing and deflecting the majority of that radiation before it ever reaches you. Step outside that shield and things change fast. Anyone who leaves Earth's atmosphere without proper shielding is exposed to significantly more cosmic radiation than they'd ever encounter at sea level. Part of why astronauts have strict career limits on how much total time they're allowed to spend in space. If that's not extreme enough, there's always the option of drifting toward a black hole instead. The radiation surrounding one isn't just intense, it's powerful enough to strip DNA apart entirely, unraveling it faster than any cell could ever hope to repair. Realistically, though, this option is a bit of a cheat, because by the time you're close enough to a black hole for the radiation to matter, gravitational forces are already tearing you apart on a much more immediate, much more dramatic level. Cancer would be the least of your problems by that point, which honestly makes this the dumbest entry on the whole list, since you'd need a rocket, a death wish, and a complete misunderstanding of priorities to even attempt it. Number 7. Move somewhere toxic. Not everyone wants to travel that far just for radiation, so here's an option that just requires picking the wrong neighborhood. Living close to a landfill, an industrial waste site, or a chemical processing facility means constant, low-level exposure to a mix of toxic substances absorbed through the air you breathe, the water you drink, and sometimes the soil under your feet. Over years, that steady drip of exposure adds up into something much bigger than any single day would suggest. If you want this most extreme version of this option, there's a real place for it, a stretch of land in Louisiana along the Mississippi River that residents and researchers have nicknamed Cancer Alley. It's home to more than 100 petrochemical plants and refineries, packed into an industrial corridor roughly 85 miles long. The communities living there, many of them low-income and historically marginalized, have been documented to have cancer risk rates dramatically higher than the national average. In some studies estimated at up to 50 times higher for certain pollutants. It's not a rumor or an exaggeration, it's a well-documented public health case that researchers have studied for decades, and residents have spent just as long fighting to get it properly addressed. Which, to be fair, mostly just means signing a lease somewhere unpleasant and waiting. Possibly the least exciting method on this entire list, but effective all the same. Number 8. Move to Australia. And finally, an option that sounds like the exact opposite of everything on this list. On paper, Australia has one of the highest cancer incidence rates in the world, higher than almost anywhere else on the planet. If you were just chasing a high number, this looks like the perfect final move. But here's the part that flips the whole idea on its head. Australia's high numbers aren't because the country is more dangerous, more polluted, or more radioactive than anywhere else discussed so far. It's because Australia has one of the most advanced cancer detection and screening systems in the world. More cases get caught, which means more cases get counted, and crucially, more cases get treated early while they're still survivable. The actual death rate tells a very different story. In Australia, roughly 3 out of every 10 people diagnosed with cancer die from it. Compare that to countries with less developed detection systems where cancer is frequently caught late, once it's already advanced and much harder to treat, and death rates can climb to around 6 out of every 10 diagnosed cases. So this might be the single dumbest move on the entire list, not because it doesn't work, but because it accidentally works against you, dragging you into a country that's actually better at catching and treating the exact thing you were trying to get away with.